Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco Rivera. The state of Tennessee has added 3 death row inmates to the list of scheduled executions for this year. Byron Black, who is 65 years old, is scheduled to die by lethal injection on August 18. Black was convicted of killing his girlfriend Angela Clay and her daughters Latoya, age 9, and Lakeisha, age 6, in the year 1988. Gary Sutton, age 52, is scheduled for October the 6th. Sutton was sentenced to death in 1996 along with a co-defendant, James Dellinger, for the 1992 shotgun killing of a man named Tommy Griffin, who was 24 years old. And 59-year-old Donald Middlebrooks, convicted for the 1987 torture and murder of a 14-year-old boy in Nashville, Tennessee. 2 others who participated in that killing received life sentences. But next on the list will be Carl Wayne Buntion. Bunchen is scheduled to be executed in Texas on April 21st, on the same day as Oscar Franklin Smith in the state of Tennessee, a case I profiled in the previous episode. Carl Bunchen was born on March 30th, 1944, along with his twin brother, Kenneth. I want to correct a statement I made in the previous video when I said that Carl Bunchen is currently the oldest inmate in the United States. He is currently the oldest inmate in the state of Texas. I would like to thank JazzFan03 for pointing that out to me when he mentioned that there are actually some death row inmates in California who are in their 80s, along with at least one in Florida. However, in California, I actually found a death row inmate named David Carpenter, who was known as the Trailside Killer, who will be 92 years old this year. While Carl Wayne Bunchen is not as old as that, when he was born as one of twin boys, World War II was still raging in the Central Pacific as the United States Navy's Task Force 58 destroyed 158 Japanese aircraft and sank over 40 ships. In the year 1961, at age 17, Bunchen was arrested for theft and was paroled in June of the following year. In November 1963, at age 19, he was sentenced to 2 years in jail for burglary, but was released a year later. In November 1970, now 26, he received a 10-year sentence for possession of narcotic drugs and damage to property. He was paroled after serving 5 years. Okay, let's pause for a moment here. The following year, in 1971, Bunchen's twin brother, Kenneth Bunchen, got into a shootout with police officers outside this complex on Tidwell Road in Houston and was shot dead by the officers. Reports later surfaced that at the time, Carl Bunchen had vowed to someday get revenge for his brother's death. Let's hold that thought for a few moments. In January 1979, Bunchen, now 35 years old, got sentenced to 9 years for burglary of a motor vehicle, but he was released on supervised parole 4 years later in May 1983. And in April 1989, Carl Wayne Bunchen, now 45 years old, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the sexual assault of a child. However, he was released a year later on parole in May of the year 1990. 1 month later, on June 27, Bunchen shot and killed a Houston, Texas police officer. Bunchen was the passenger in a vehicle, an older model Pontiac, that was being driven by a friend named John Killingsworth. The 2 men had spent much of the day drinking beer and driving around the Houston area. While driving, Killingsworth had committed a traffic violation that was observed by Houston police officer James Bruce Irby, who was on his motorcycle. Irby had been with the police department for 17 years. Irby proceeded to pull over the Pontiac at the intersection of Airline Drive and Lyerly Street in Houston. The driver, Killingsworth, got out of the car and was speaking to the officer at the rear of the vehicle. A short time later, Carl Bunchen got out from the passenger side, approached the officer, and shot him in the head from about 5 feet away. Officer James Irby had reached for his gun, but it was too late. As James Irby lay on the ground with his gun beside him, Bunchen fired several more shots into the officer's back. Carl Bunchen then took off running. Incredibly and suddenly, a witness, a man named Richard Castillo, who happened to be a security guard, appeared on the scene, grabbed a hold of the dead police officer's gun, and held John Killingsworth there until other officers arrived. One other witness used the radio on James Irby's motorcycle to call for help. As one officer remained on the scene to provide CPR to James Irby, other officers were in pursuit of Carl Bunchen. As Bunchen was running, he approached a car nearby with 2 women inside who may have heard gunfire in the area. The women panicked and accelerated to get away from him. He shot several bullets into the car, which it is believed that he wanted to carjack, striking and injuring both women with bullets and fragments of broken glass from the car. Bunchen was later found hiding inside a warehouse where some reports state that he continued shooting at police, but eventually gave up and he was arrested. In 1991, a jury found Bunchen guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals vacated his death sentence in the year 2009, but he was retried and again sentenced to death by a jury. John Killingsworth was not charged with the murder. He did have drugs in his possession at the time and was sentenced to 5 years for that. Carl Wayne Bunchen is also reportedly a member of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas prison gang. Bunchen would later say that when he approached the officer, James Irby, that the officer had reached for his gun and pointed it at him to shoot, so Bunchen panicked and got his shot off first. The witness that had suddenly appeared on the scene testified that to be false. He told the court that Officer Irby barely had time to reach for his own weapon when he realized that Bunchen was coming toward him, aiming a gun with both hands. Officer James Irby has a son, Cody, who was 2 years old when his father was killed and who is now also a police officer. James Irby also had a daughter who was just 1 year old at the time that he was killed. Her name is Callie Irby. Here she is heard speaking of the frustration with how long it has taken to execute the man who killed her father.
It's been very frustrating. It's been something that has rocked my family for the past 30 years.
Callie Irby has said that she plans to be present when Carl Wayne Bunchen is put to death. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe so that you are alerted when another upcoming execution is profiled. I'm Paco Rivera. Bye for now.